And it builds on the roughly $1 trillion in deficit reduction I already proposed in my 2012 budget.
This whole thing is a farce. I mean, first of all, he is talking about $1.1 trillion in cuts. In fact, he's saying they're slashing $1.1 trillion from the deficit. Well, where's this number coming from, $1.1 trillion? Well, that's how much the president claims they're cutting over the next 10 years. 10 years? I mean, what about this year? What are they cutting now? I mean, $1.1 trillion over 10 years, that's $100 billion a year. Well, the budget is $3.7 trillion. That's what they're spending. This year's deficit, 2011, is $1.6 trillion. They're talking about cutting $100 billion? I mean, that's nothing. I mean, all the $100 billion represents, what, less than 3%, 2.5% of the budget? I mean, it's a rounding error. I mean, it's nothing to brag about.
That step alone will save us about $750 billion over 12 years. Above all, it will require us to choose a vision of the America we want to see 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road.
The only reason that they want to talk about a 10-year period is because the savings are so small. They're trying to manufacture a big number. But all that really counts is this year, because the president can't bind future presidents and future Congresses. Who knows what they're going to spend 5 or 10 years from now? The only thing that counts is what they do right now.
It's a plan that aims to reduce our deficit by $4 trillion over the next 10 years, saving $400 billion in current and future spending.
They make these crazy assumptions on what interest rates are going to be for the next 10 years, what inflation is going to be for the next 10 years, what unemployment is going to be for the next 10 years, what the GDP growth rate is going to be for the next 10 years. They have no clue. I mean, they don't know what it's going to be next year, let alone 10 years from now. And, of course, what they assume is just pie in the sky, never even going to happen.
Saving us $500 billion by 2023, and an additional $1 trillion in the decade after that.
What was President Obama projecting the 2011 deficit would be in 2010? They were projecting about $1.2 trillion. So it came in $400 billion higher. They weren't even close. They were off by $400 billion 1 year away. How are they going to get 10 years worth of deficits to within $100 billion a year?
A reform that would reduce the deficit by $320 billion over 10 years.
They couldn't forecast the financial crisis of 2008 in 2007. So how do they know what's going to happen over the next 10 years? They don't. That's the truth. They're clueless. This thing is a farce. They don't want any real budget cutting. They want to continue business as usual.
We can keep making the investments that create jobs.
Obama actually has new spending in the bill. Of course, he's calling it investment because spending is bad, right? But investment is good. Yes, investment is good when it happens in the private sector. It's bad when the government spends money and calls it investments. Government doesn't invest. It spends. See, in the private sector, if there's an investment and it's bad, right? If somebody combines land, labor, and capital in a way that doesn't efficiently satisfy human demands, there's a loss there, and the activity comes to an end. If they do it right, then they make a profit, and they expand the activity, and they command more resources. But in government, when government screws up, there is nothing to put it to an end. It just continues in perpetuity because the government can fund itself with taxes or borrowing or printing. And so we don't want the government to invest money. We want the government to stop spending.
We will invest in medical research. We will invest in clean energy technology. We will invest in new roads and airports and broadband access. We will invest in education. We will invest in job training.
No one is talking about making some serious cuts to defense. All this is, tinkering around the edges. It is not going to head off this economic collapse. It is coming, and it's coming in large part because nobody in Washington, neither President Obama or Republicans in Congress, are willing to do what it takes to level with the American people and put their own political butts on the line and propose a budget that actually cuts government spending in a meaningful way.